Hello, music theory students. This is the first of a number of videos about diatonic sequences. This is the first one. It's an introduction to diatonic sequences as taught or as described in the Harmony Through Melody textbook by Charles Horton and Lawrence Ritchey. But a diatonic sequence really is made up of repeating patterns. So I want you to look at everything in this first measure. And then you can see in the second measure, it repeats, but at a different pitch level. And the third measure, it repeats again at a different pitch level. And it really is used in music as a transitional device, maybe at the beginning of a development section or a middle of a section to move from one key to another. So it's really a really cool transition device. Now it's called a diatonic sequence because if you notice, even though this is an A minor, there are no accidentals in the sequence. So it just moves through the key in the diatonic key without having any accidentals in it. And you can, if you choose, use seventh chords as well. You will always have a triad on the downbeat. This is how it's set up in the textbook to keep it simple. The downbeats are always triads. And then the decorating beat is where you can have a seventh chord. And it doesn't matter what kind of a seventh chord it is. It doesn't have any tonal function. It is just repeating a pattern in whatever seventh chord comes out. So it might be a diminished chord. It might be a major minor chord. It might be a minor minor chord. It doesn't matter. You just follow diatonically what would happen in the key. And our ears are used to this. You hear this a lot. So let me play this first one. So the one that is the example for the chapter. So you can hear what this sounds like. Okay, so that's what you're going to be writing, something like this. Notice the soprano line has lots of instrumental figures in it. And the rest of the voices are really supporting that instrumental soprano line with a little bit of decoration, especially in the bass. Okay, so what I was, this kind of shows you the inside of this. So we have a statement 1, then a statement 2, exactly, the pattern is exactly repeated, but at a different pitch level. And some of the major and minor relationships might change, but the pattern is true to the diatonic key. In this case, the pattern is repeated once, then it goes down by step, repeated again, goes down by another step, repeated again. And then to close off this assignment, you'll have just a regular cadence that continues somewhat, some of what was there before, but really you just go from 1. In this sequence, you end up on 5, and we go back to 1. So in my next video, I'll talk about the different kinds of sequences. This is one kind of a sequence. So this is really what we are going to be looking to do in this chapter. So here's an example from the middle of one of Handel's Chaconne pieces from the 18th century, a short excerpt, but you'll see it follows, what we're really trying to teach you is the statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, and how it repeats. So again, like the example from the textbook, this one, we have a statement 1 repetition, and that first chord, that first triad is held for 2 beats. And then we have a decorating chord, and then another triad, but now the whole thing is repeated, but down a pitch level, and then the decorating, and then again, it's repeated and down a pitch level. And you should notice your instrumental figures, this time the bass is moving quite a bit, and the bass is doing all those instrumental figures that we've been talking about. So especially that neighbor skip figure. Okay, so here we go. This is the sound of this example from the literature. Okay, so you could hear how that has this 3 statement repeating, but at different pitch levels. That's what's really important. So it's not just a repetition. You've done repetitions of motives before. This is a very specific pattern of repetitions 3 times. It's not just twice, it's 3 times. And it repeats exactly, but diatonically. Okay, so it just moves down to the next chord, whether it's major or minor or diminished. It moves down to the next chord. So I'm going to take you very quickly through the steps so that you first have a sense of how you're going to compose your diatonic sequence for this chapter. So step 1 is to notate the whole note baseline that outlines the linear motion from the tonic to either 4, 2, or 5. Okay, so depending on the type of sequence, there are going to be 3 sequences that you're going to learn about. So depending on the sequence that you decide to do, you choose your baseline accordingly. It really, all of the sequences come from some kind of a 4-whole note baseline. And in my next videos, I'll talk about that. This one is an ascending sequence, and it goes from 1 to 4. So this is the first step. You basically put those whole notes on each one of the downbeats. The second step is you decorate. And this is where, remember I was talking about earlier, you can get to your 7th chords. In this case, we're going to do a repeating bass. So repetition is one of the figures. So you're going to do a repeating bass, and that's going to move. And then once you choose what you're going to do in the first measure, it gets repeated exactly in the second and third measure. And then we'll leave the cadence for decorating at the very, very end. But what's most important is this sequence part. So that's step 2. Step 3 is to create the framework. And we're big in this Horton Ritchey textbook. We're very big on creating frameworks so that we don't decorate out of nothing. We always give ourselves things to start with. So in this case, you are going to add the soprano, and you're going to decorate first with a whole note soprano that parallels the bass on strong beats. So you can do this in tenths, octaves, or compound fifths. Okay, this time we've chosen tenths. All the way up. And again, it can be octaves. So you might worry that this is parallel octaves, but there is a lot of decorating that's going to happen. So you're going to have to worry about over the bar line parallels, but you have a long way to go before, a lot of decorating to do before you end up over that bar line. So even if this was all octaves, that would be fine. Okay, and I put these 2 next steps together so you can see how they relate. So step 4, you confirm the harmonic structure of the sequence by elaborating the soprano with an appropriate repeating 3-note melodic figure. That means that if you're leaping, in this case we're leaping, you have to make sure it's part of the chord. So in this instance, this chord, because we know this is a 6-5 chord, this is going to be C, E flat, G, and B flat. So that skip step figure has to make sure it has a B flat, has one of those chord tones in it. In this case, it's a B flat. Okay, so it could have done a double skip because it would have gone to a C. So as long as you're leaping to a chord tone, we still need to remember about our chord tones. So once you choose what you're going to do, you do that in the first measure, and then again, you repeat it. Because this is a sequence, each one of these measures has to be exactly the same, except for at a different pitch level. So almost the same, but at a different pitch level. And here's where the decorating, so we've done our initial decorating with skip steps in this case, okay? Now we decorate the soprano and the bass. So the soprano gets decorated with instrumental figures, and the bass with, in this case, we're doing again a double skip. So a little bit of decoration, but not too much. You don't need to worry about it too much. This, of course, could have gone up to first inversion too, but you do have to remember your rules about your bass and what chords are allowed, and the bass really controls it all. Okay, so notice now we have a neighbor figure here, we have a prime embellishment 5-note figure here, and then a skip step. So all the way through this, we are using our instrumental figures. And once you choose how you're going to decorate, it just gets repeated exactly, but at the new pitch level, no accidentals. Okay, let me play these for you. So I'll play step 4 first, and then step 5. Okay, a nice open structure there. Now step 5, and you'll hear the decoration that has been, or the elaboration that's happened in both the soprano and the bass. Okay, so now you can hear sort of that, that overarching repeated sequencing sound. And finally, oops, we get to step 6. And step 6 is simply adding the inner voices to realize the chords first, and then completing the cadence. And the cadence, it just means that we have to get to 5. So in this sequence, on our 4th measure downbeat, we end up with a 4 chord. You need to get to 5 on beat 3, okay? And then you end up doing that 5-to-1 perfect authentic cadence. So that's what's really important about this one. So simply realizing the voices. So the important thing is making sure that over the bar line, when you're going from one chord to the next, actually anytime you're going from one chord to the next, make sure you don't have any parallels. But other than that, you don't have to worry about the same kind of voice leading, because this isn't a dominant function chord to a tonic. It's simply a diatonic sequence. So you just have to make sure that your voice leading works in terms of no parallels, no parallel fifths, no parallel octaves, and that it has a nice shape to it. And then all the notes of the chord are in here. So here we need C, E, G, and B flat. And here again, we need C, E, G, and now the B flat has been dropped. So in this case, that is okay, because we don't have any tendency tones in this. Okay, so let me play this final step for you so you can hear this. Okay, and I know that I said that we kind of dropped the B flat, although we kind of did, and it's still, if we're thinking, still kind of holds over and resolves to that A. This is still considered a C7. So C, E flat, G, B flat. Okay, so we have that 7 there. That's implied that that kind of carries over, even though we're jumping around. That happens a little bit more in instrumental melody. Okay, so that's the basics of this chapter, the basics of a sequence. In the next few videos, I will be talking about the 3 different kinds of diatonic sequences.